So we're here again to talk about Speedpaints 2.0. I want to cover the issue I found in my previous video where I encountered some cracking when they were drying. I really want to look at that in a bit further depth today. That initial video, I wasn't really set up to scientifically get to the bottom of why I encountered the cracking. Because I'd initially showcased the Speedpaints original versions, I'll give you a bit of a brief look at the results of those. But basically I used the same primer and the exact same method, 4 drops and a very liberal coat of speed paint over the models, and I didn't encounter any cracking with the original ones, so I wasn't really expecting to find that with the version 2. But this video today, we're going to take a deep look at those colours that cracked and get to the bottom of why that happened. So this is going to be a deeper dive into why they were cracking. At this point I want to give a shout out to Army Painter. Within a couple of days they'd gotten hold of me to find out the details of how I'd applied it, what primer I used, etc., to see if they could figure out what the problem is, and by all accounts it sounds like they're looking into it. Basically had 3 reasons given to me as to what can cause the cracking. The first one being trying to artificially speed up the drying process using a hairdryer or something. I haven't done that in any of my speed paint videos. They're all dried naturally. The second reason is the primer, and yes, this could very well be it. And the third reason is just over heavy application of speed paint. This could well be why the speed paint 2s are cracking, but like I said, I applied the same liberal amount on the Speedpaint 1, the original version, and they didn't crack. This is definitely something new that I've encountered with the version 2. So I want to try and delve into this scientifically as I can in my garage. So I can rule out the first reason I've had, which is the artificially sped up drying. So we're not going to look at that today. They're all going to dry naturally. As for the primer, the original primer I used in all my other videos is Rust-Oleum 2x Ultra Cover Flat White Primer. This is just from the hardware store. Because of my physical location, it's a bit tricky getting hold of some of the modelling stuff. So that's been my go-to for cheap and easy primer. So luckily, I do actually have some fit-for-purpose model paint primer from Army Painters. So this is the Army Painter War Paints Matte White Air Primer, perfect coverage. So those are going to be the 2 primers that I use for our test. So I have sprayed up 15, I've actually sprayed up 30 of the cloak models with the Rust-Oleum primer and airbrushed 30 of them with the Army Painter Matte White. So I'm going to take 15 of each and paint them with a very liberal coat, trying to replicate what we found in the first video. So all going to plan with this experiment. I would like the Rust-Oleum painted models to crack, and this would show us that we managed to replicate the exact same conditions as the first video. And in a perfect world, the Army Painter primed ones would not crack, and this would show us that it was just the primer and maybe some of the oil in the rattle can. And then if we still get some cracking with the ones that are primed in the matte white, then we'll look at the application side of it, and I'll go through and do a very light coat of Army Painter speed paint on there, leaving just a tiny bit in those deeper parts to see how it reacts when it is slightly thick. We do want that after all. That's going to give us our shadow tones, but not excessively thick. So after the experiment's finished, we should have 15 that have been spray painted with the rattle can with a heavy coat, 15 that have been spray painted with the heavy can with a light coat, and then vice versa for the Army Painter primer. And then we'll have a comparison and see what we found. So here we have the Rust-Oleum rattle can primer. Now I wanted to show the application process so that everybody could see how the paint was applied, but we'll just follow it through for this one colour, and I'll save you the hassle of having to watch me paint another 14 colours in exactly the same process. So here we are applying a heavy coat of speed paint using 4 big drops to be precise, and honestly the model wouldn't be able to take much more paint on it. we're applying the same heavy application onto the Army Painter primed models. And I'm using the same 4 big drops to cover this model as well. And by the end of this application, any recess that can hold the speed paint will end up with quite a lot of deep pooling on it. The amount I'm using is on the upper limit of how much you would actually use in a real life situation, but it's been the standard I've used in my previous cloak painting videos, so we'll repeat it anyway. This is my control, so this is done exactly the same as the original ones that cracked. And all going well, they will crack again to show we've replicated the conditions. And then with the heavy coat as well, so this should have the same liberal amount of speed coat on top. The only difference being this is Army Painter primer. So I've had some pretty good results from the first trial run. Definitely was able to replicate the conditions from the video. So all of the ones that had been primed with the rattle can primer and had a heavy application of speed paint have all cracked. So I also saw some cracking on the Army Painter primed models. So now we're going to try giving a light coat over both versions of the primer. To be honest, there were only about 5 colours of the Army Painter primed models that were noticeable when glancing over the models from a normal viewing distance, whereas ones done with the rattle can primer were noticeable on all the colours. You could see cracking everywhere. One thing I did notice when observing them drying was on the rattle can primed models, the speed paint pulled away from the high points more noticeably, which overall left the model looking whiter than the Army Painter primed models. Now I'm using a lighter coat of paint overall and will finish it off by wiping my brush clean and then wicking out the excess speed paint from where it is pulled. Now of course we should be trying to retain some degree of control when applying paint. Directing it on to where we want the paint to be and pulling it away from the areas where we don't want it. But it did take me quite a bit longer to paint the models lightly than it did to just slap on speed paint all over it. And also at the end, wicking away some of the paint from the pooling sometimes left a bit of a strange transition and looked a little bit messy. So I think there's a middle ground between slapping and painting on speed paint that needs to be found. Now this is probably pretty common sense to a seasoned painter, but it may need pointing out to somebody using speed paints to enter into the model painting space. So from here, let's have a look at the results. I'll give you a bit of a voiceover while we look at all of the colours and exactly what we've found. So you'll notice the rattle can primed on the left and the Army Painter primed models on the right. We just looked at the heavy coat versions and now we're seeing the light coat. Notice how much darker the right one is, which is where the Army Painter primed model is. This hints at the rattle can primer being a little bit slipperier, so to speak. Now, I'll let the rest of the colours play through for you to have a look at before we go and look at the conclusions. So in conclusion, you're going to be looking at using any type of oil-based or ink-based primer, such as the Rust-Oleum, a hardware steel rattle can, or anything that's not made specifically for acrylic painting. You may have to look at putting a clear coat in between the prime and the painting stage. Apart from that, if you're using Army Painter's primer, you should be pretty good to go, even with a heavy coat. The results were pretty good. And in saying all of that, in the previous video I did complete 3 models, had absolutely no problem with cracking in a real world application, and it hasn't hindered me at all from using Army Painter speed paints in my painting. And it would be nice to sort of know what the difference is between the version 1 version 2, but apart from that, the colours are awesome. It's a really good range. The metallics, again, super stoked with metallics. I don't think you can go wrong with those. They're a great tool to have in your arsenal. And yeah, a really comprehensive colour range. And for now, I think that's me parting ways with the little cloak models. I now have 150 of them painted up. So if we do any more tests like this, it will be on a different model. Apart from that, if you like the video, give us a like, leave your comments below. It might be interesting to know if you've had trouble with the new version 2, and if so, is it the same colours I've had trouble with, or is it some of the other colours? But hopefully that puts some of the questions to bed. Definitely try and use the right primer when using the speed paints. So if you enjoyed the video and found that interesting, give us a like, maybe subscribe to the channel if you want to see more like this. And as always, thanks for your criticism on the videos. I'm still learning my way through all of the editing, the software, the processes involved in creating the videos, while still trying to push myself a little bit with every video. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. But hopefully you got some answers to the Army Painter cracking situation out of this video. Alright, see you in the next one.